pace, cultural context in which you were conceived?
Yeah, so I was born in 1970. And in 1970, what was happening was the Vietnam War was going on, and there were lots of protests. The Kent State shootings happened the year I was born. The second wave of feminism was in its second decade, and the Beatles broke up. In our country, Nixon was president. It was the launch of the jumbo jet era, and there was also a treaty, a non-proliferation treaty for nuclear weapons that was signed by 43 countries, I believe. And so there was a lot going on, as I feel like there always is in every year. But probably most significant for me was that I was born into that second wave of feminism. And my parents met in medical school. And my mom was kind of one of the first classes of women to go through medical school. And so it was pretty unusual still at that time for women to be medical doctors. And so she always jokes that my dad she had the pick of all the people in her medical school classes, and because there were so many men and only I think 4 women in this class who graduated. So my mom became a pediatrician. My dad graduated a couple of years earlier, and was a cardiologist. And when I was conceived, I was the third child and the third daughter of my parents. And they my mom had a very scary birth with my oldest sister. The placenta detached, and both she and my sister almost didn't survive that. But despite that, she was really determined to have vaginal births afterwards. And so both my middle sister and I were born through a VBAC, which was great. So there were also several miscarriages that happened during that time period before I was conceived. And so I think there was probably a lot of concern that I might not make it. And so they were very happy that I did make it. And there was also a little bit of pressure from family and friends, just saying kind of things like, well, I bet you're hoping for a boy. And so I think there was some expectation that I was going to be a boy, and they were going to name me Stephen. And so when I came out and I was a girl, I think there was a little bit of surprise, perhaps a little disappointment that I was yet another girl. So I came into that world. And also my mom had Demerol for pain management, which was pretty common in the 70s. And so I came in a little bit medicated into the world. So there was a lot of stuff going on. My mom was working full time as a pediatrician, and she did have help from this amazing, wonderful woman named Nellie, who was an older woman, and she was Irish Catholic, and she was just a lovely grandmother kind of figure. And I was actually born on her birthday. And so when my mom came home from the hospital, I sort of became Nellie's baby, was what it was termed as. And Nellie kind of took me on as almost like a grandchild. And so we were very, very close. And she lived to 101 years old. So I had a lot of wonderful time with her throughout her life. So that was kind of the way that I came into the world and the space that I was conceived in. And I know that my sisters were super excited to have another little baby in the family, and there was a lot of love in the family.
Excellent, Excellent, thank you. And since you have managed to give us a beautiful image of the time and the space, can you please tell us where exactly were you born? Where in
Sure.
the States?
Yeah, so I was born in Concord, New Hampshire, and that's where I lived. That's where I grew up and lived my whole life until I was about 30. And then I came out to Colorado, and I now live in Boulder, Colorado. So, yeah, so I grew up in a kind of a small New England town and um, just very homey in a white farmhouse looking place, and it was lovely and cozy and wonderful.
And speaking of the cultural context, the people that were there present in that little village which, where you were born, in 2 or 3 sentences, how would you describe the values, the attitudes of the people living there in that village?
That's a great question. So before I go into what the people were like there, I want to preface it by saying that my parents both grew up in New York. So my dad grew up in Niagara Falls, so upstate New York. My mom grew up on Long Island, and they went to medical school in New York City.
Mhm.
And the intention was they wanted a small place to settle that was felt a little more homey and not quite so overwhelming as New York City. And so they intentionally looked for places in Upper New England. Um, and so in Concord, there was it was a small town, and as anyone who's grown up in a small town might know, everybody knows each other and you kind of know everybody's business. And so um, there was kind of an air of um, protection in that, of knowing everyone, of having some kind of relationship with everyone. My mom was one of the pediatricians in town, so she took care of a lot of my friends and their siblings. And my dad took care of a lot of the parents as a cardiologist. So we kind of knew a lot of people. Um, and it could be a little bit constricting too, sort of small town think. But it did have the advantage of being um, the capital of New Hampshire. So the state house is there, the governor, lives there. And so there's a lot going on politically in our town, and just a lot of interesting pieces that happened in that town. So it wasn't just a small town. There were other things that were happening, but it definitely had the small town feel.
So what were the best qualities of your mom? What is her name?
Her name is Caroline.
Caroline. So what did, from your point of view, as you see your mom, what were the best qualities of that lady?
So my mom is probably one of the most driven people I've ever met, especially as a woman. Like I said, she kind of broke some barriers in terms of her career, and she was very analytical and very driven, and um, really emphasized that women can be whatever they want in kind of a man's world, which it was back then. Um, and yet she also had some very feminine qualities um, growing up, and she liked to have pretty things around the house, and um, she was, affectionate and caring. And she very much loved being a mom. And so I guess there was also part of her that was super adventurous. So my mom liked to just go out and do things that um, kind of push the edge a little bit. So one of the examples was she was determined to climb all of the 4,000-foot mountain peaks in the White Mountains. Um, and there are a lot of them. And she wanted to do this as a family. And so we all did it. And I had climbed all of those mountains by the time I was 7. And so it was like every weekend we were out in climbing times, like summer and fall. Um, and we'd go hiking, we'd climb these peaks and bring a picnic, and it was lovely. And she would then kind of plan out the next adventure. Or we would go to the ocean and swim in the ocean, even though it was freezing. Or we would go to one of the beautiful lakes in New Hampshire and enjoy, being on the lake and playing in the water. So she was very open. My mom's 88 now, so she's a little different now at 88, but she was just very open to life and really wanted to live a full life. She's very, very busy all the time.
Excellent. A spirit of a pioneer spirit, as I see here, and curious with a lot of interest and curiosity for life, exploring the limits, going beyond limits, openness, and relational person, right?
Right. Yes.
Excellent. Yeah. And the father, what is the name?
So my father's name was Walter. He passed just this past November at 90. And my dad was kind of like the love of the family. He was very gentle, very kind, very quiet, very like thoughtfully spoken person. Really, really wise and intelligent. And he had this very sweet, gentle sense of humor. And so he'd kind of tell a very appropriate joke at just the right time. But he was pretty reserved. And so my mom kind of brought out more of the adventurous side of him. So I have some of my dad's old things, like he started downhill skiing, and he had these super old wooden skis, that were very skinny. And I have these great photos of him skiing and snowshoeing on these beautiful snowshoes that he'd made. And he loved fixing things and playing cribbage and playing ping pong and listening to the Beatles. And he was a big classical music fan. Both my parents were. And he just brought kind of like he had a lot of Taurus energy, and he would bring kind of the home and the grounding. And my mom was more the adventurer, wanted to go out and do a lot of things. My dad was happy to sit by a fire he just made and read a book. But the really beautiful thing was the way my parents really complemented each other. And so once they retired from their work as physicians in our town, they spent the next 10 years going around the world and working in developing countries and setting up health clinics, training healthcare practitioners in places like little villages in Nepal, in India, Cambodia. And they loved it. They'd be gone for months. And even though my dad was, again, a Taurus and really liked being home, they would just come back, and I'd see them, and they'd look like little kids, like just giddy of, wow, that was amazing. And the people are so beautiful and so open, to learning these new things. And so it was really amazing. And during that time, my father, who has always had this artistic bent to him, but had never spent any time kind of cultivating it, got into photography. And he was into taking portraits of all these people he met around the world and always using natural light, and trying to really bring out the essence of the person. And our house is has many of his photos hanging up that are just beautiful. Um, and he was also super humble, so he never really wanted to show anybody his photos. But we convinced him one time to have an art show in our town of Concord, which was such a stretch for my dad. And it was so well attended because everyone knew everybody in the town. Um, and he just displayed probably 50 of his most beautiful photographs and just got such positive feedback from that. And I think it really fed this part of him that was creative and hadn't really had that opportunity to express itself yet. So I was always so happy just to, um, see that part of my dad develop at that point. And my mom was a phenomenal pianist. So her mother was a piano teacher, and she was kind of a piano prodigy, sort of. And so my mom grew up, she had perfect, perfect pitch and everything. And so we all learned to play the piano. And she would be upstairs and she'd hear us hit a wrong note on the piano. And she'd call down, that's B flat or F sharp, which didn't feel great when we were growing up, but was such a gift. And so she can still play the piano. And even when my grandmother, who was probably 95 and in a nursing home, we had gotten her a stand-up piano to have in the nursing home. And she, at that point, had dementia, didn't know who any of us were. And her hands were so gnarled up from arthritis that she could barely move them. But she would sit down at the piano and you'd put a piece of music in front of her, and all of a sudden it was like her hands just came to life. And she'd whip up and down the keyboard, and it was just so beautiful to watch that creative part of her still lived on, even though the rest of her world was so different. So that was kind of, the artistic sides of my parents and where they came from as well.
Excellent. Excellent. Such a beautiful harmony, balance, mind and heart, tenderness, but also work,
Yes.
openness, but also reflection,
Yes.
taking care of your own things, but also taking care of the others. Art and science, so beautiful, so beautiful. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I really feel so gifted from my parents of, um, because they grew up during World War II and the Great Depression, their work ethic was just phenomenal, and their ability to really scrimp and save, I guess I would say. Like they never spent very much money. They were always very frugal. And we had this huge garden. One of our neighbor friends had a large plot of land that was not being used, and it was about half of a football field. And we would garden it every summer, and it was a lot of work. I have a lot of respect for farmers who do that work, but we'd be out there every couple days weeding and watering and taking care of these plants, and then we'd come home and everything would be either eaten or canned. So we'd have food all through the year. And my mom was really, probably my dad too, but I'd see it more in my mom, that she was very proud of that we could kind of take care of a lot of our needs just by growing our own food. And so that hard work ethic and the appreciation of the land, the appreciation of nature, those pieces feel like such a solid part of who I am. So I feel really grateful for that.
Beautiful. Stephanie, what about the grandparents from from the paternal side? What did they bring to you, or how do you think of them?
Hmm. So my father's parents, they grew up in, well, my grandmother, who I don't remember at all, she passed when I was about 3. So I don't have any recollection of my grandmother, but she was an amazing cook. And my grandparents owned a tavern in upstate New York that was hugely successful because it was during the war. And so everyone would come to the tavern to hear the news of what was happening
Yeah.
in the war. And my grandmother, Millie, was famous for her chili. So it was Millie's chili. And um, my dad recalls, loud jukebox music and, just the boisterous atmosphere of a tavern. Um, and I also didn't know my grandfather very well. He wasn't around very long in my world. But he was big into fishing and hunting. And so my dad knew those skills of, living off the land and so he brought some of that. He didn't continue hunting, but he would still fish. So that's kind of the background on my father's side. My mother's side, my grandmother, like I shared, was a pianist, but she grew up on a farm in Kansas. And she was one of, I think, 11 children, not all of whom survived. So a huge family. And she was expected to stay and farm. And she was not having that. So my grandmother was kind of her own pioneer. She hopped on a bus, made her way to New York City, decided to wait tables, put herself through college, and did some training at Juilliard. And she was very, very determined for a woman of that time. That was pretty surprising. My grandfather was Irish Catholic, and he came over during his mother had come over just after the potato famine, and came. So they were, they had just immigrated, and his father died before he was born. So he was born in New York City, and they lived in Little Italy, and sorry, in the Irish part of town, right next to Little Italy. And then he had all these friends. He's had a pretty colorful background of friends who ended up being in the Italian mafia, and who were kids at the time, and other friends who his best friend was Jewish, and they would my grandfather, the story is my grandfather would always sneak out of Sunday school because he didn't want to be in Sunday school. And he'd meet his Jewish friend and they'd go and, be kids all over the city. But that was always kind of a funny story that I remember. And so my grandparents met in New York City, and they were very proud of kind of like making it in New York. And when they lived on Long Island, there was nothing there. It was just pastures. Now it's all, towns and things, but there was nothing really there. And they found a home. And my grandfather was a lawyer, and he would commute into the city every day, and my grandmother would drop him off. And so that was kind of the situation my mom was born into.
Wonderful. And you have 2 more sisters, as we heard already. Are there any other siblings after you, or there are the 3 of you?
So my oldest sister, Erica, she lives in France. And my middle sister passed away, unfortunately, when she was 18. And then there's me. And then there were no more children after that. So right now it's just the 2 of us. And yeah, they were, my sisters were wonderful growing up. My oldest sister is still an amazing human being. And so I just feel super grateful to have had them.
Are you together in the same area, or with your eldest sister, or is she abroad or somewhere far?
So my sister Erica lives in France.
In
She's
France.
she
Okay.
hasn't she hasn't lived in the United States for, I don't know, 20 years or something. She's worked overseas in different areas. Um, and she's married. She decided not to have children. So my husband and I have the only grandchildren of the family. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So, is there any special story which is connected with either one of your grandparents from either side, or your parents, or your sisters? Is, is there any significant story you associated with something really important for you?
Hmm. Well, there's so many stories. I think I go back to the story about my grandmother, on my mom's mother,
Yes.
and her desire to do something different that was really not accepted. I know that her mother supported her, but her mother was suffering from MS, and she was struggling to even just move at that point. But my grandmother, Dorothy, just was able to make her, like, this just blows my mind. Back in that day, made herself, got herself to New York City. Like, she just decided that's where everything is happening. That's what I'm going to do. I don't want to be in Kansas. And just that she had the drive and the gumption to be able to do that, and then get to New York City, find a place to live that was safe, work as a waitress, put herself through college, and paid for her music lessons. Um, I just see so much of what ended up coming through to my own mother, Caroline, and then what got passed to both my sisters and me, um, as this, um, like, this desire to go out and um, do something, do something with our lives, to make some kind of an impact. And we all chose different ways to do that. But just like that human drive, the ability to say, it doesn't matter if um, it's a man's world or whatever.
Mm.
It's what I want to do. And I know that I have one life on this planet that I know of, and that it's not very long. So I want to go out and do what I want to do, um, have a positive impact. And I see this in my whole family, and now I see it in my own children. And that's a really beautiful thing to see in my two daughters. And they currently are 10 and 15. Um, but they have that same drive and the same curiosity, like the interest in making the world a better place, making people feel comfortable, showing these amazing artistic gifts that they want to share with the world, having their passions around relationship and animals and nature and things like that, that just, they obviously make my world really rich, but I imagine them, as they move on and grow up, they will continue to enrich other people's lives. And that feels really sweet and positive for me, just watching that move through the generations
Yeah.
in such a positive way.
Your vision as well, right?
Right.
Going down. Excellent. Right. So, what were the initial traits, as you remember that, which brought you to the studies or to the profession, which you will tell us what you do? Uh, I don't know when in your life, but you tell us, please.
Yeah, yeah. So, my career has had many iterations so far. So, I started out as a journalist. I love to write,
Uh-huh.
um, but I didn't really enjoy the newspaper world very much. So I moved from journalism into education, and I taught elementary and middle school children for about 6 years. And then I found that I was always drawn to the kids who needed the most help. And I was always taking my class outdoors because that was important to me. And I wanted them to just be engaged in the world. And the schools that I worked at were all surrounded by woods and lakes and, beautiful properties. So we could get out and do really amazing things in in nature. And because I was really drawn to working with kids who were just needed more support, I started looking into programs for wilderness therapy.
Mhm.
And so I came out to Colorado, and they had the first wilderness therapy program in the world. Um, and I came to that program as part of the first class of wilderness therapists that graduated, met my husband in the same class, and he was from California. Um, so we ended up staying in the area. And I was doing work as a school-based therapist, and we were doing a lot of horticultural therapy. So I'd help children and their families. We'd build gardens on the schoolyards, and they would tend the plants, and it was very sweet. There are a lot of lessons in that. But um, when my husband and I got married, I was already 36, and we knew we wanted to have children, and we'd better um, start working on it if we were not going to miss our limited window. And so we had a baby pretty soon after getting married. And in that process, we both joined Dr. Annie Brooks from the
Oh, really?
Brook training. She's in Boulder, Colorado. We joined her first training for the somatic attachment work. And so we were part of that first class because to me, attachment was something I was fascinated by. And I wanted to make sure I was kind of doing it right as we brought our children into the world. And so I was pregnant during that first year of the training. The training was 2 years. And my daughter was born partway through into the second year. And so our oldest daughter became one of our teachers in that class, right? And so Annie was modeling a lot of what secure attachment looks like and how to hold space for, babies. And so it was really, I was kind of I don't know, I don't want to say I was a guinea pig, but I sort of was a guinea pig for the whole class of, being pregnant, being the one pregnant person in the room, bringing the one baby into the class. And a lot of these people chose not to have children. And so it was really a beautiful and fascinating experience, and so sweet. Everyone was so supportive, and our daughter Caitlin got so much love in there, and taught people so well about just babies. And we got to share a lot of our story around the pregnancy and the birth, and um, so it was just a really amazing experience. And I realized that's what I want to do. I want to do this kind of work. I don't, I love being in the wilderness, but I'd rather just go camping with my family than be out for 30 days with a bunch of people and be away from my family. So I really switched trajectories at that point. And I found Santa Barbara Graduate Institute.
Oh,
So that's when I met Marty Glenn and all of the amazing
yeah.
educators there. And I became part of the um, pre and perinatal psychology PhD program. And it worked really well for me because at that point I had a she was probably 2 years old when I started that program. And the program that I chose to do was partially online, and then we do these intensives for about 10 days in Santa Barbara. And so I would bring Caitlin with me, and my mother-in-law, who lived in California, would come down and take care of her during the day while I was in class. And then on lunch break, she'd bring her, I would nurse her. It was very busy, but it was really sweet to be able to do that and be learning about such rich material at the same time. And it was just expanding on everything that I had learned in Annie's training. And so that went on. I had our second daughter, um, and she was she had just turned 3 when I graduated from the program. And at that point, SBGI had been bought out by the Chicago school. So I ended up graduating from the Chicago school, which was fine, but it wasn't SBGI. Um, and, just had some wonderful connections with other students there and just felt like I learned so much. And I did my dissertation after studying Dr. John Greenenberger's um, work and the reflective parenting program. I started working with him, and he had a program that was designed to be used prenatally, but had never been tested, and it wasn't quite finished. So my dissertation was focused on taking that program and kind of expanding it and adding, a bunch of things to it. And then I found 8 participants in Boulder, and then we did, I think it was a 12-week program with them, teaching them about mindfulness and the reflective functioning pieces. Um, and that was so sweet. I really enjoyed the actual research of it, the actual group, and got some really amazing feedback. And some of those women they were all first time pregnant women, and they're still in touch. And that was what, 9 years ago. And they still get together. So I feel like even just doing the dissertation allowed space for the importance of people having children to connect in this very important time frame. So that was very sweet. And then I also was just very tangentially running my own private practice because I didn't feel like I had a lot of time. I really wanted to focus on getting my dissertation done and be around for my children. So I would see just like a few clients, and a lot of them were doing attachment and bonding work. And I was, being supervised at that time, and it was just really, really helpful to have kind of the wide berth. And then once my youngest was old enough to be in school part of the time, I started taking on more clients. So I've had a private practice since 2009, which is now mostly geared towards expectant and new parents and babies. And so I'll see families with children up to about age 5, like once they start school here, and really focusing on the transition to parenthood, how to, stay present and grounded, and parent the way that feels important to them to parent. So I try hard not to put a lot of my own opinions. I do drop information that feels helpful. But I feel like there are so many different ways to parent, and I don't know the best way for everyone else. So I want people to find their own way, and I want to support them, and just provide as much education around that as possible and support. And so I work a lot with people who've had, kind of traumatic births and separation, babies who've been in the NICU, things like that. And that's very sweet. And then I also just do kind of more coaching work that's not so much therapy, where I'm just helping parents sort of become the best parents that they can be and have a great, loving connection with their little ones. And then I'm also developing courses to help. I really just feel like disseminating a lot of this information, especially when, SBGI closed, like the one place that was giving out higher degrees in pre and perinatal psychology and health. And, there are ways that people can find their way to the information, but I feel like it's so important. It needs to get out to more people more quickly, is my sense and my belief. And so I've really tried to just focus on what small piece can I do to help get that information out.
Excellent. You have already mentioned a lot of inspirators from your early beginnings to now, and we keep Annie Brooke and Martin Glenn among them. Do you consider these two persons, these two ladies, as inspirators in your career or your profession?
Absolutely. I would say especially Annie, because I trained with her, and she has such a unique way of bringing the body into her work. And so her training is so experiential and deep. And Marty's amazing in her vision, and so I so appreciate all that she's brought. I also worked for APA for 6 years on their journal, and I was, for the last 3 years up until April 2022, I was the editor-in-chief of the Journal of the Association of Prenatal and Perinatal Psychology and Health, their journal. So I also got to work with Thomas Verney, who was, amazing. And I got to work with people who were bringing in articles that were so amazing and sharing information at these conferences. So, I did a little bit of, I got to connect some with Michael Trout and just so many people. And Jean Rhodes was working on the journal at the same time. And, she, I think, got maybe the first pre and perinatal psychology and health degree is, if I remember correctly, is how she put it. And so she was just a wealth of knowledge as well. And so I feel like I've been so blessed to have had so many of these connections with these people who have been doing the work much longer than I have, and really setting the foundation, and just watching it grow too. So when I left the journal, I passed the torch for the editor-in-chief position to Dr. Kate Stahl-Cavell, and she's such an amazing woman, and much a younger generation than I am. So she was bringing in all of these new ideas that she's, putting into the journal now. So there's this amazing way that it keeps branching out to these younger generations, and I hope that continues and continues to grow. Like, we're planting the seeds and we're watching the fruits of the labor come up. And it's beautiful. It's beautiful to watch. And there's so much change that's happening, right? Like with artificial reproductive technologies and the blessings and challenges that come with that, with the different communities, the BIPOC community, the LGBTQIA plus, it keeps extending. That whole community, like, just amazing to see what's happening now and the different perspectives that everybody's bringing in. I feel like it's so rich, like it just keeps expanding out. And so with the kind of a history of more like white males in psychology in general. I love seeing all this new energy come in and very different perspectives, very different life experiences, and very different than my own as well. And just it's so beautiful to watch it expand.
So you are very young, and you are the present generation creating and developing. It will be quite some decades before you pass the torch to the next generation. But anyway, you already mentioned that you see a difference between your earlier time of being in the field and now, right? And have you got a story, a very short one, which could summarize the spirit of the research and the work in these earlier phases of your profession?
Mm. So let me rephrase the question to make sure I understand correctly. But is it a story from earlier in my profession, or a story of how I'm seeing things change now in my profession?
No, I mean, you speak about now we have challenging themes like AI coming to the front, or genetic engineering, etc., etc. But when you started studying with Annie Brooke and Martin Glenn, and this is the early beginnings of your profession, of your coming to the profession, is there any story from then, from these years, which can give the essence of these times?
Mm, that's a great question. So what immediately popped into my mind was my first day at SBGI. So I walked in as a fresh student. I'd had this training with Annie Brooke. Um, I was still a mom of a little one, only 2 years old at that point. And I remember walking into this great open room on the SBGI campus and looking around and thinking these are going to be my people for the next handful of years until I complete this program. And the woman who walked into the room was Ray, and I'm forgetting her last name, but she was an amazing teacher there, a somatic teacher. And she walked in with this presence, and it was like she brought a hush into the room. And there was just like this quaking of possibility. That's all I can describe it of like the excitement of what was about to come, and kind of embarking on this, what I like to think of as the last frontier. Not that space is the last frontier, but like our inner selves, and discovering where we came from and the importance of that prenatal and perinatal time and our own births and how they impacted us, and how they changed what we were bringing to the world. And so there was just like, I can only describe it as like the crackling of possibility. That was what I felt. And I remember looking out. It was a beautiful campus. It was, in Santa Barbara, which is gorgeous, and all these beautiful flowering trees, and the windows were open, and it had a beautiful essence to it. And I remember just dropping into the material, and dropping into this space with my classmates and feeling like we were pioneers. We were coming into this program, a lot of us for the first year, some of us had been there before, with this understanding that not a lot of people were on this journey. it was, and it still kind of is, a little bit unusual, right? And there were so many beliefs that there were belief systems that we were kind of teasing apart, and really looking at, like, what is prenatal life like? What do we understand? What don't we understand? And for me, there's even beyond that. Like, I had connections with my children prior to conceiving. So, and I was certainly not unusual. I'd spoken to lots of people who had had interactions either through kind of a lucid dreaming state, or I'm not sure how to describe it, but that wasn't unusual in this space. There was something so beautiful about that. Like, oh, these people understand me in some way. They understand what I'm talking about. They understand the importance of this period of time in life and how it helps shape us, how it helps shape our entire world, how it helps shape how we care about the planet and take care of the planet. Um, because I feel like once you get this on a deep somatic level, there's no turning back. It's it's forward moving. It's discovering and being curious and being awed by what we know and what we certainly don't know, even at this point. And there was something so beautiful about that really touched me and fed my journey from there on out, all those years.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie, for sharing this moment, which is so emotional, so spiritual, so humane.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And how would you speak about the contribution that you have seen yourself already offering to this field? So far, there are still many decades for you to go on, but so far, is there anything you would say to describing your contribution?
So I guess what I would say is one of the pieces of being so grounded in the wilderness and nature itself. Every night I go outside. We have a big furry dog, and I take her for a walk. And I look up at the sky and all the stars and the moon when it's out. And I'm just so aware of how small we are in the universe and then in the metaverse, right? And so what I think I bring is just the hope that the curiosity and the passion for life, for understanding, for trying to make the world a better place. I hope that I bring that, and that I infuse some of that into my own children, as well as just love them up, which is what I probably do best. So I hope that is my biggest contribution. And I feel like there's so many amazing humans out there doing amazing work. And we're all just planting seeds. We just keep planting the seeds and watching things grow. And so I really think of myself as like just part of a bigger fabric. Not that I've necessarily contributed anything incredibly, deep and meaningful that's changed the entire world. Just my children, my love for the planet, my love for other human beings, and my care about this topic, this field, that feels so important. The way that we come into the world really does matter, and how we treat all these next generations matters so much. And so my hope is that through the work that I do, I'm passing on some of that love and care and connection with others, and just trying to make the world a hair better.
Yeah.
And, because I'm just one person.
back to the vision,
Yeah.
as we spoke about it earlier, right? So, what have the most important lessons? What are the most important lessons you have? You would like to see grow and mature in the next half century, let's say,
Mhm.
especially as times go to the directions we see they go.
So I'm going to go back to kind of just the basics of what feels just most critical in our global sphere. So for me, again, the way that we bring people onto the planet, I feel like if we can expand that sense of the potential for love and connection between human beings and between all species, um, that's going to help us. It's going to help us survive so that we don't end up having to go to Mars. And it's hopefully going to make the world a better place. I mean, I'm kind of, you know, I'm I'm a little bit Pollyanna-ish in terms of wanting the world to be a lovely, harmonious place. And I know that we also carry darker sides to us. And there's nothing really that we can do about that. It exists, it's there. It's probably important that it's there. But I would love to see more of the other sides coming out. You know, I would love to see just the respect for the human experience and the planet and all the other species that we share the planet with, as well as whatever else is out there. The respect and connection grow. And if I can make a difference in helping that to happen between parents and their little ones and parents as a couple, then I feel like I will have made a kind of difference in that way in my small corner of this large world. Um, and and so that would be the seed that I would want to most plant, just the love and respect for life forms on the planet and caring for each other and caring for our planet so that we're taking care of ourselves and also just the wider world.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. So as we move towards bringing this to a closure, and because Stephanie, you have been a journalist and then an educator and then a therapist and a parent and a human being all the time.
Yes.
If you go back to the group of journalists that now do their beautiful task, the profession of journalism in the world, what would you tell them? What would be the benefits, changes, or whatever if they integrated some, at least, of the findings in the field of prenatal sciences? How would they benefit?
That's a great question. So when I was in journalism, and still true today, there's this horrible phrase that says, if it bleeds, it leads, right? So we, as humans, can often be drawn to the car crashes, the accidents, the wars. That's usually the stuff that ends up on the front page of a paper, right? But every now and then I'll see something positive. Someone's setting up a beautiful organization that supports people who are experiencing homelessness or something like that, right? Like there's so much good happening in the world. And I would share with these journalists, like, this is actually what people need to hear. This is food for your soul. Um, and bringing in those parts of prenatal life, of the importance of birth, of helping us move from potentially a more kind of pharmaceutical driven society in which we live, that can all just make the world a better place. Like, you can have this super positive impact by bringing this work and all the tangential fields, right? The birthing world, the early parenthood world, the parenthood through till your children leave the home world, the grandparenting world, all of that can be so positive when we provide it the right nourishment, right? If all we see, what we see so often in this country is mass shootings, and we hear about the war in Ukraine, and there's so much happening that's so painful in the world. And I think sometimes people become, numb to it, or just are so overwhelmed that they don't know how to process it. And I feel like it's partly because we need more positive, um, lifting information, lifting news, lifting research of like, wow, like, look what we can do in this amazing, beautiful world we've been gifted to live in. Look what we can do when we, really, bring something like kangaroo care into the NICU. Like, look how many babies' worlds did we change when we did that, right? And we gain that knowledge and understanding of the importance of skin to skin between the parents and the baby. I mean, just like amazing things that we could do to make the world better. And because so many people ingest the news, it's a ripe area, right? Like, people want to hear that. They want to hear the good news. Like, oh, like, this positive thing happened. That's amazing. What could I do to make the world a better place? Maybe I could do something with my own child at home that would, follow this protocol or whatever, that would support our relationship or support my baby to reach their highest potential in life, right? To just bring in more thriving and less surviving is how I would put it.
Right. And to your ex colleagues of school teachers, what would they change in their everyday teaching experience with the children if they integrated this knowledge that a child does not start being the moment the child is born, but before? So what would they change if they knew that?
Yeah. So first, I just want to say I have so much respect for teachers. Their work is so hard, and they're trying to do so many things that are, hopefully bringing a very positive impact to these children. So I know that their load is already very heavy. But one of the pieces that I tried to bring in was just the extra care. So when I would kind of seek out those children in my classroom who clearly needed a little bit more love and support, I wanted to provide it in a safe container where it allowed them to feel safe. So rather than, I often would get children in my classroom, because I was that teacher, who were the problem kids. And by the time they left my room, most of them were in a better place because they felt seen and heard and appreciated, like, instead of just being labeled. And so if there were teachers out there who were, for example, labeling children because that's just how they thought of things, I would hope that they would have more information on the importance of um, taking the whole big picture into account, the child's early life, their experience in their family at the time, all those pieces that obviously psychologically we get, but I think a lot of educators might not have access to necessarily. And so I would want to bring that in so that there be just a lot of not just structure in a classroom, but a lot of love in the classroom of like, you're okay, no matter who you are, right? We're going to help you with the pieces that are challenging for you. And we're just going to let you know that you're an amazing little human being and we want the best for you. So we're going to do everything in our power to help provide that for you. And we're going to help all these children who, some of whom have maybe better circumstances that they're coming from to also help support you. So there's peer support rather than, kind of pushing away a child who is struggling in some way. So that would be what I would want to share with them.
And to the therapists who are now offering their service, but remain to integrate the findings of prenatal sciences in their practice, what is the message, your message to them?
Well, I think just like you said, it would be around the importance of those early years and how deeply the pieces that happen to us pre-verbally and in those first 3 years when we're on the planet, how deeply they can impact us. And so it's wonderful to have so many different tools and theories and it's about that human to human contact. That's where therapy works, right? It's not just your skills, it's in the contact with another human being and in the care of that whole person. So for me, I really, even if it's an adult coming in, I really want to know, like, what was your prenatal life like? If you know, what was your birth like? What were the first 3 years of, after you were born like? Because it gives me such perspective on this person's journey. And if there are things that are showing up now in relationship that maybe got triggered from something that happened prenatally or something that happened during your birth, maybe we can just work on, unpacking that and healing that so that you can have an easier journey from here on out. Whether you're 70 or 80 or 20, it doesn't matter. Like you can always make some change, some headway at least on that change. And so I would want other therapists to have the curiosity. And I know a lot of people do, and that's wonderful. But if they didn't have the curiosity, I would want to invite that curiosity in them.
Excellent. We see the title of your book, Preparing for Parenthood, and you have talked to us about meeting with parents in your during the day. So, what is the message that you bring to them?
So in the book is mostly conversations. So it's conversations followed by action items. And again, I really step back in the book about kind of putting my own beliefs and values on other people because there are 1,000 different ways to parent or more, and there's no one right way to do it. And it depends on your culture, your background, your history. There's so much that goes into it. And so the invitation is to have these conversations and take steps forward so that you can be better connected. If you're in a partnership, you can be better connected to your partner. If you're a single parent, you can have these conversations with yourself and get clarity on where you stand and in terms of moving forward and things to think about. And it's a very inclusive book in that way. And so just having the conversations and action items, setting people up for a little more ease I don't think transitioning into parenthood is probably easy for anyone. There's that lived experience that you just have to live, and it looks different for everybody. It looks usually better if you have a lot more support. And so this is one of the ways that I can help hopefully reach a bunch of people to provide a little bit of extra support, right? Because it really, it really does take a village to raise a child in this world. And in this society, at least, we're pretty non-villagey, right? There's a lot of separation here. I know in other societies there is more of a village aspect to it, but I really wanted to invite the conversations, invite the connection. So just to help the parents feel a little more easeful, a little more relaxed, like they have plans and they know here are people in my community I can reach out to for support, and I already have their names. And here are ways that I can connect with my baby that I might not have known before, right? And just just to have some tools in the toolbox, and then finding their own way. Like I think you need to follow some of your own intuition around parenting, and then there are things that we're always presented with that we might not have clarity on, that we need more support with. So providing a little of this and a little of this, and hopefully inviting people to navigate their way through this challenging transition of moving from pregnancy to through birth, through early parenthood, through later parenthood, through teenagers, different pockets of world there.
Excellent. It is really a work of helping or contributing towards reconnecting with our deep essence.
Yes,
with who
exactly.
we are. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Has there ever been anything you would change if you could?
In my own world?
Yeah, in your own life.
I try to live life without regrets. I'm sure if I picked things apart, I would have liked to done some things differently, but honestly, like most people, I've learned a lot from my mistakes. um, those have probably been better teachers than all the things that went right and easily, right? And so one of the most humbling things was, for example, becoming a parent. So I had worked with children and families my entire adult life at that point, and had, even as a teenager, I was teaching swimming lessons to children, and I was just very involved in that world. I had been an educator, and I'm an avid reader. So I had checked every library book out about pregnancy, birth, parenting. I'd read everything, I felt like. And it was so humbling to actually become a parent, um, both for my husband and I, because we're both therapists. And moving into this, wow, I'm so overwhelmed. Um, I feel pretty isolated, like I don't have quite enough support. I need more support. I feel like I'm upside down half the time. I'm not sleeping. Nursing isn't as easy as I thought, right? And so maybe I could look at that as like, I wish that I'd been better prepared. And that was the seed of this whole book, right? So that kind of mistake, I don't want to call it a mistake, it was a challenge. It was a very hard thing. And it led me to really want to help other people in that area. And it really led me to seeking out support so that I could best take care of, our little daughter. Like I wanted to have all the love and support that we needed. And I needed to stretch to do that because it wasn't easy to ask for help, right? That was a newer thing for us. And so really calling in the troops of like, okay, like I'm struggling with breastfeeding. or I haven't slept and I can't remember how long. Like just getting support around those pieces was so helpful. So I wouldn't change, for example, that challenge because I learned so much. It was so rich and so helpful in a lot of ways. And I hope it wasn't too challenging for for our little one at that point. Although having two therapists, she knows that we ask her a lot of questions and try to support her through a lot of things. So um, hopefully, hopefully the impact was also ended up being positive for her in some way as well.
Right. So to end this meeting, this beautiful conversation, as you like saying all these things, conversations. If your two daughters were now present, and if they were willing to put the final two sentences, one from each of them, to speak about the person you have been so far and the person they have experienced so far, what would they say?
That's a really great question. So my older daughter, who's 15 now, is just a love. She's just such a love. That's her. She just beams compassion for all beings. She would perhaps say something like, thank you for just loving me and showing me how deep connection is really possible, even in a world that sometimes feels scary. Our younger daughter is also just so sensitive and beautiful, and she's pretty fiery too. She brings this element of fire to a pretty earthy family. And so she might say something like, thank you for bringing out the adventurous, pioneering spirit in me, because I feel like I can do anything I want in the world.
Thank you very much. It was an honor,
Thank you.
Stephanie, to meet you, your grandparents, your parents, your children, and all the people you have met.
Thank you so much. And I so appreciate having been here and having been able to share in this beautiful forum.